want to introduce refinishing extraordinaire, professional Jack Kincella, who's graciously agreed to do this seminar for us, and we're looking forward to it. Jack, thank you very much.
I expected about 5 people. So I apologize, but holy cow, I just thank you all for coming and getting the opportunity to come in and do something. My wife and I are kind of going through a different thing in our life, and I've had some shoulder surgery about 3 months ago, and we sold our house, and we're going to be moving back up north with our family. But the club has been really good to me, and you people have as well, and they've come in and bought a lot of the equipment finishing wise that's here. I wanted to cover off some of the opportunities that you have to work with this stuff that's available to you to take and use and try. If it's something that you want, there's printouts that you can take. The club actually had set up an account number, and throughout the course of the year, if you order stuff, the club gets a discount after you hit certain plateaus of orders. So this information is available to you, and you can try the stuff without any sort of expense, and then come back, and if you want to get something, take care of it. I'll be around for about another 6 or 7 weeks, so before we leave. So we've been very blessed to be able to do that, and we're going to take advantage of it. So I do a lot of spraying. That was my primary way of finishing things. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that because it creates an expense that you've got to get into if you really want to spray furniture. You know, the Harbor Freight sprayers and the things you buy at Lowe's and Home Depot just aren't going to do it for you if you want to spray your furniture. But you can certainly talk to me afterwards. It's just an expensive option if you wanted to get into doing spraying. My sprayer, just the sprayer alone was a $700 sprayer. And you've got to be able to be willing to use the different types of lacquer, whether nitrocellulose or pre-catalyzed. You've got to be willing to do the process. It's not very time consuming, but it's certainly something that there's a lot of little moving parts to it. So, as well as using a specific lacquer thinner that goes with this lacquer to mix with it. And a lot of guys just, you know, it's just a lot to do and absorb. So if you have questions or you want to talk about it afterwards, we've got the stuff here and you can go through that. Mostly you want to talk about things that, you know, you can do in your homes or do for friends, neighbors, if you wanted to if somebody came to you and you needed an opportunity to bring finances into your shop that you want to do to buy more tools and more things. And this is a great way to do it without getting into a lot of expense. So if I talk about something and it's not enough information for you, or you have a question specific, I'll try to do some of the things that folks brought to show you a little bit about what you have. But stop and just ask the question, and you don't have to wait till the very end. So, is there any questions or anything before we get started? I'm about as loud as I get, young lady. I'm not a real loud speaker. I'll try to do better. Okay. If I get too soft or you can't hear, just raise your hand or something. Okay. One of the easiest things, first of all, as far as some of the finishing that you can do in your own home or for others. We've all seen that old English type of stuff that you've seen in stores. Mohawk puts this out, and everything I use is pretty much Mohawk. And the reason that I use that is they've been around a long time. My dad did this for close to 60 years, and then I spent 3 years doing an apprenticeship with him. Before he retired, he was getting Alzheimer's, and so we stayed with the same products. They're a pigmented stain instead of just a colored oil or a colored water. They stand behind their products, and they have a wide range of things that you can do for whether you're a wood turner, a wood carver, you want to just touch up stuff, you want to make furniture, whatever you want to do. These folks have things that you can do that with. Several years ago, Minwax came out with a disclaimer on their products that they don't guarantee the colors anymore from lot to lot. And Jack Daniels has run into that issue when they started back with Early American was the stain that they used for all the things that were made for Jack Daniels. That stain today is so poor that they're looking for other alternatives and trying to figure out something else to do. They actually looked at some of the Mohawk products to start having, because they want everything to be the same. So Home Depot, you notice, doesn't carry them anymore. And if you go to a lot of any seminars that you may watch on YouTube or know people, Ronnie Young, for example, that a lot of us know, they just don't, they won't stand behind their Minwax products. But that doesn't mean that you can't use them. It's just that Mohawk stains, as I said, are pigmented. They're the old style stains. They got a lot of old colors to them, and they're UV protected. They don't sunshine coming in doesn't bleach them out like it does your Minwax and your other stains. So it's one of the reasons why we stay with them. But one of the easiest ways to start to repair a piece of furniture and make it look better, especially if it's got a lot of scratches, chairs, tables, is to use this stuff called scratch off. You have one for light finishes, which is pretty much anything that you have out there, and then you have one for dark finishes, which would be something that's really almost dark brown or black. And you can just put this on a rag and put it on there and rub it right in. And you'll get about 3 or 4 months worth of a good holding repair with this, and you may have to come back and touch it up again depending on the use, but it's just a great item if you've got things in your home that are just scratched up and you want to do something with. The rubbing compound are these, and again they come in a light and dark. I don't use a lot of it, but if you wanted to just you had a finish on something, and it's just like with a car, you wanted to shine it back up, you could use it, but you have to use a buffer with that. So I don't use a lot of it, but I've always just had it. There's Danish Oil, Tung Oil, and we don't have Teak Oil here. But I used to get a lot of requests for, what would you use these for? Well, Danish Oil, a lot of it can have a color to it, and it's good to use if you're going to have something that you're going to kind of roughhouse a little bit with, and take some abuse to it. That's a good strong finish that has some give to it. Tung Oil I use for inside. It's the same kind of thing, and most of your tung oils, like your Danish oils, are not straight tung oil anymore. There's a very small amount of tung oil. It's a lot of different things like linseed oils and mineral spirits and all sorts of different things that are in that, but the majority of it, to thin it out, like any company wants to make money, so they'll put down for tung oil.
If you wanted to color your Danish oil, could you use just some of these Mohawk stains?
You could use a dye if you
dye.
want to do it. You wouldn't want to use a stain with that, but you could use one of the dyes. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the Danish oil does actually come with a lot of different colors to it, so if you wanted to use that.
Speaking about that, if you used a cherry-colored Danish oil on a piece of cherry furniture that you're working with, will the wood continue to darken even though you put that little bit of pigment on it?
Yeah, you're not going to stop the wood from doing its natural thing, but it's like with red cedar. It's the same kind of thing. The wood's going to continue to oxidize and turn, but you don't know what you're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
Every piece of cherry and every piece of red cedar depending on the makeup of that wood will change different. But wood will always tend to go, maple is another one that, you know, a lot of times it's white, but eventually it does start to blend out and get yellowish and that kind of thing. So you'll still continue to get that. So tung oil I use when I'm doing something inside. If I'm doing something outside, a lot of us have been associated with the spar varnishes and outdoor, you know, polyurethanes and things like that. But just like paint, after a while they're so hard that they start to chip off and you know, crack, and they discolor, and you'll get water into them. So I use teak oil. Teak oil doesn't chip off. You don't have to sand it all down to, you know, get back to bare wood again, and you don't have to strip it and do anything with that. A light sanding and then more teak oil will allow that wood just to continue to change and do the things you got to do with it. But again, you use it outside, and tung oil you can use inside.
Jack, going back to the spray stuff, you always are told, or you read the directions, to shake the can for 30 seconds. Does that actually move the pigment around?
Yeah.
And how, should you do it for the full 60 seconds? or-
No, yeah, it depends. I used the other day when we were down here, I haven't used them in quite a lot of time, but I might shake that for a minute or so, just to get all that stuff moving around in there. But, you know, when I was in the shop, there's about 50 or 60 different colors here that they make, and they have more than that. But, you know, like when we did the little finials there, I used 5 different colors to blend that finial and match the other one. So, you know, I just know the color, but a lot of times for you guys, it's just going to be trial and error. We'll talk about those more, but that's, you want to get those mixed up. And you also want to, a good point came up the other day, you want to tip it upside down when you're done and using it and clear your nozzle. Yes?
Were you saying teak or teak oil earlier?
Teak, T-E-A-K.
Oh, teak oil.
The other finish that I found that I started using a lot of is shellac, and I've used a lot of that as I got into epoxy about 1.5 years ago, doing river tables and other pieces. It seals the wood, and I'll tell you on your tutorials, if you want to get into doing epoxy, you know, to put a seal coat of more epoxy to seal all that up, but it gets expensive to try to use that. And a can of this is 15 or 16 bucks, and it goes forever. So you take a chip brush or any brush and really douse your wood, especially if you're going to have the epoxy, so you don't get the air bubbles that release. Because if you start getting air bubbles releasing into your epoxy, then you just weaken that, and it you know, your end result is you got a real nice finish with a lot of air in it, and then you can never sand it out, or you gotta redo it. So I started using that as a cheaper alternative, and I can put 2 or 3 coats of that on even a real porous piece of wood and pour the epoxy, and I don't get any issues with it. The other thing that I use this for is to work on, a couple of guys brought these oak chairs, and again, this goes along without doing a lot of finishing work to strip and redo stuff. Our initial reaction to take a look at this piece would be to strip it. When you really don't have to get into that expense. You could take and get this all wiped down, give it a light sanding, and coat it with a coat of epoxy, and wait a half an hour. And then, again, Mohawk has these powder colors, and I used to use these years ago because we didn't have the pens, but you can mix this powder, and you've got 1,000,000 different colors here, with just straight paste wax. And you can take whatever color you want that to be. Matt, do you have a little container?
What?
A little container and a couple of stir sticks. And I'll just show you what you can do with this.
Something like this, with little.
Yeah. Usually a screwdriver. Just pop this up. Sorry, I thought I had everything prepared here. For you guys that do carving and wood turning, this is a, you know, a lot of times you use coffee grounds to try to do something, to fill in a crack or things of that nature, or to change a color on something. So you can just take a little bit of wax and let's take some modern mahogany, put in here. You can see what we've done is just change the color of that wax. Now you can go buy brie wax for $15 a can, and or you can use just paste wax and this for, you know, $5 or $6. And then what you can do is you just take this and you take one of those brushes, like a shoe brush, and after the shellac has been on there, you just rub this on there. And you'd wait 15 or 20 minutes. Let it kind of start, like wax does, to cover up a little bit. And then you can come right back and change the whole cosmetic of that chair just that quick. So if you want to do any kind of different color to it, it's just that easy to do. And then you've got the shellac to seal up the wood. You've got a paste wax finish over the top of it to protect it for a real long time, and especially even if it's going to be outside. So, you know, it's just going to take a lot of punishment, and you really don't have to do anything else to that. If you wanted to come back over it down the road and put a teak oil on it or put more paste wax on it, you can go do that. So you just got that kind of freedom to go do that. If you're turning a piece of wood or you're carving, and again you want to, it's blotchy, or you just want to change the cosmetic of the wood, you've got a host of different colors here. You've got maple, all sorts of maples, walnuts, anything you'd want to do. Again, the stuff is here, and if you just want to try it, you should come and get it. It's all yours for free. So just come in here and take some of it, and take it home and play with it and try it. You know, that's the only way you're going to learn the color variation. Any questions about that?
I have a question. Years ago, we were at Paul's place, and they were talking about using shellac. And the advantage of using shellac was that if there's something wrong with it, you put another coat over top of it, and it just levels it out and makes it, all the mistakes seem to go away.
Well, shellac is such a runny type of finish that you want to be cognizant that it dries real quick. But when you put it on, if there's contamination, for lack of a better term, in your wood, if there's got a lot of wax on it, or I don't know where this chair has been. It looks like it's had a pretty rough life, but you know, you just the shellac will seal all that contamination up that's in there. Mold is another thing that shellac will help you take care of. So.
Is it fairly color fast? In other words, on the chair, you always have to worry about somebody sitting down.
No, it's as soon as, I mean, you know, if I had waited for the wax to dry and then just buff that off, I mean, that's not coming off on it. It's just like putting paste wax on it, on a floor or anything. And you can do this with hardwood floors. I've done several hardwood floors where people wanted me to make a color to match up to something else. The old pine floors, you know, had that reddish tint to them, and you just can't get that with the new ones, and you know, so you can do that same thing. So while we're on the point of shellac sealing up contamination, we all get barn finds and things like that or you may buy an antique and bring it home, and there's mold and mildew into it. Whether it's white or black or whatever color is going on with it. You You know, there's all sorts of different things you could introduce to try to clean that. Some people will tell you to put bleach in it, but bleach is wood. So, you know, now you're introducing something that's going to change the whole dynamic of what you have. So I use a white vinegar and water. It's a 50-50 mix. And just a rag. And I'll, you know, just get it soaked right up good and wash that whole piece off. Just constantly wringing it out and rinsing it. And you'll see the water and the vinegar will just turn black. It'll just be that quick. And you can use steel wool. I use a fine steel wool if I'm going to do it. And I only use steel wool with the vinegar and water combination if it's an oak or an ash type of wood like this. I would never use it with maple, walnut, mahogany, because as soon as you introduce steel wool into something, you're scratching it and then never get it out. You'll see a lot of your waxes, like your brie wax and things like that, it'll tell you to put it on with steel wool, and it's just a nightmare. You're just creating a problem for yourself. So if you wax things, you know, use a rag. So I wanted to touch base on that. We actually had somebody asked about something, I think Wednesday, you know, mold on something, and that white vinegar and water will kill that, take it right off. And then you come right back with a rag with some clean water and just wipe it all down. And then just let it sit for a day. It's got to sit, you know, if you can get it outside in the sun or whatever, you can do that at least for 24 hours. And I take lacquer thinner to get all the rest of that residue off. Just a cheap lacquer thinner that you can buy at Walmart, which is this. And I wipe that whole piece down with lacquer thinner. And you're ready to go. A lot of your contamination stuff is gone. This stuff evaporates in just seconds when you put it on, even if you really soak the wood. So, say it's $16 or $17 for a gallon of it. In lieu of any kind of solvents that have oils or anything in them, this does not. I don't use mineral spirits or things, and I'm not saying that that's bad. I just don't use it because I don't want anything into the wood. Okay. Any questions so far?
Can you tint that, put a tint in that shellac?
It usually just comes clear and amber. I've never tinted it. I used to buy my shellac in flakes that was colored. And I would buy an unwaxed shellac in some of the basic colors, in a brown, a garnet that would be close to a mahogany color. And then I would just, you know, weigh it out and mix it with denatured alcohol and then strain it. And that gets you what you have here. And there's different cuts that I would use. For example, if I was doing a dress, a mahogany dress I had to do, and I had to paste wax the top, and it was quite old. It had that old shellac and varnish finish, and we used to mix the two together way back in the day. And you know, I just didn't want to lose the patina of that, but it was pretty rough. So I made some garnet flakes of shellac that was it was like a 2-pound cut. This is usually 1.5 pounds, so a little bit thicker. And put it on there and let it dry, sand it, and then paste wax it. And again, I paste waxed it with the color of the mahogany that I wanted to match up the rest of the piece. So you can see how easy it is to just match up colors with that.
If for some reason you started off with the wrong tint, customer wanted something different or whatever, what would you do to correct that?
Well, probably can't. I mean, you can go a different tone, but if you want to go from brown to red, or from anything, you know, from dark to light,
sand it out.
Now once you put paste wax on, it's really going to be hard to do. And this is straight pigment. The stuff that you find in the stain is, you know, I guess freeze dried, for lack of a better term. That's what this is. This is the actual pigment that they've mixed to, you know, to make that stain. So, you know, if you're going to stay into a light color, my recommendation, or even for yourself, would be to take a piece of scrap wood, whether and it doesn't have to be old. It can just be a piece of oak. and mix that on there, because the other thing you're gonna have to do when you mix that is to decide how much color am I gonna put in here. Now, I just put a little bit of wax, I just put 2 little bits of color on there, but you can see how concentrated that is, you know? So, and a lot of times you might have just a little bit on the end of a putty knife and put it in there and start small and see what you want to do. See, I wanted to try to get this color on the seat, which is going to be pretty close to what we got. The other thing that you can do with these, and we used to have to do them years ago before we had the pens, and I'll talk about those in a second, is to mix our colors. And this is a shellac-based mix liquid. You just put a little bit in a cup, or a little bit of this in there, and then you can just take your paintbrush, and I would just pick a color that's close to what I was going to do, and I would start putting it on just a piece of cardboard and get my color that I wanted. I can kind of just show you real quick. So you just start out kind of clear, put a little bit on to get it wet, and then just start mixing your color. And that gets you something that you can do with a touch-up, and then you can just keep mixing more and more. You can start to see how it goes darker and thicker for you. The other thing you can do is to introduce other colors, like I can mix a little bit of this lighter and start to make a whole new color. So there's no real set way, it's just more to play with it, kind of get a base color down of what you like, and then start playing with it till you get the tone that you want. And this stuff dries in seconds. It's just
What
shellac.
liquid was that?
Hmm?
What liquid was that you started?
It's called Rapid Pad, and it's actually a shellac that's made specifically for doing this and for French polishing. I'm probably one of the worst French polishers there was. My dad could do it blindfolded and do dining room tables. And if you've ever seen somebody that can really do French polishing, you know, it's just an art. But you mix it with, you take this stuff, build your pad, and your pad is a combination of cotton balls. And you pack those in there with a pad of shellac on it, and then you build your pad out of that, just like that, and screw it all together. And that's your pad. That's really literally how big they are. And then you're constantly just wetting it with the end of that, or with this stuff, just keeping it wet, and you can build your finish right with that. Now, you always have to put sealer on first, sprayer sealer or some form of to cover up your stain, but after that you can just start padding your finish. It's just another old style finish. A lot of formal dining room tables of the day had that on there. You see a lot of guys now that would use the basic finish first, and then they'll want to build the sheen to that real high gloss. They'll come in with a pumice stone. They'll mix a pumice stone with that, and do the same process. And then they'll come back with a rotten stone, which is the absolute finest that can rip it up from anything you can have. And they'll buff that out. And pumice on a rotten stone will give you an absolutely high gloss finish to what you want to do. So those are kind of the steps that you do get that. But in all the years I did it, my dad used to just harp on me. I just could not get that rhythm down. I mean, you just got to get it. And once you start flowing, it's just like sharpening a plane or a chisel or something, the muscle just in your arm. It's just a memory thing, and you can just do it. But I just unfortunately, I could never get it down, so I just would always say, okay, I just won't do anything like that. So, to look at, let's just change gears a little bit before we get into any of the stains or fills. And let's say that we've stripped a piece down, or you have a piece that, you know, like this walnut top table, and somebody brought it to you, and you prepared that top, whether you stripped it off and then you sanded it and got it ready. In the old days, or if you look again at formal dining room tables, you see that there's no real grain that comes through there. You put your hand on that, it's just dead flat. There's no feeling of a grain. You can see it underneath there, but you can't do it. Can't touch it. But this is paste wood fillers, and some of you may have heard of those or seen them. They come in a multitude of different colors, and they're incredibly hard to use. Again, you have to really be patient. If you ever are going to do something like that, a small table like this would probably take you close to 2 hours to put paste filler in, just the top. You would never want to do it with the legs, because you have to mix it. Just you feel you hear the liquid that's in there. You have to mix it all up real good. It's got to go into a separate little container, and then you brush it on. You probably take a 6-inch by 6-inch square and put that on there, and then let it dry. And then you've got to take and buff it out, and then you move on to your next 6 by 6-inch square. These are the applicators that you use to put it on. But it's quite a hard process, and people nowadays really don't want that look. Back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when people were more formal with what they had and furniture being sold was a little bit of a different caliber, there was a lot of that out there. But you really have to know what you're doing. There's paste finishes, paste wax, or paste fillers here, but if you're going to get into them to try your hand on it, you want a small project that you want to make, I'd encourage you to try it. Just know that you probably won't be able to move too much the next day, because it just takes a lot out of you to do that. But so I very rarely use them. I think this is an old Mohawk label from back probably in the 70s or 80s, and you know, the stuff stays forever. So you never have to worry about it. But you know, again, I just don't use an awful lot of it.
Most of us don't work with veneers, but veneers tend to be a lot more open pore, which
They are. Yeah,
which would be a place where you'd want to use that.
absolutely. You know, again, if you're looking for that look, and nowadays people really aren't. They're more open. They want that openness to them. Dean Lutz is here today, and introduced me to this stuff, and it's been just. I've never used it. I've seen it, and I've never gotten involved with it. If you have a tabletop, and you've had it for years, or somebody wants you to, you know, kind of rejuvenate that finish, you can take this called wax wash and you just spray it on right on there very liberally, and they'll just follow the directions in there. They're real simple. You spray it on, and then you just wipe it off, and it takes all that old grime and wax and everything that was on there and gets you right back down to that lacquer finish that was originally on there, that lacquer top finish, without doing any damage to anything. And then you know, you wait a little while, again, just follow the directions, let it dry out good, and then you come right back and start putting your new finish on it, or rejuvenating it with paste wax, whatever you want to do.
What's this stuff called again?
Wax wash.
Wax wash?
Yeah, yeah. It's a real technical term, I think. So now, let's take a look at trying to do some coloring. It's at the end of the day, we make something or we do something. You know, we've gotten to the point where we're ready to do some color. If you're sanding a brand new piece of furniture, or you stripped a piece and you're sanding it down, we talked a little about this on Wednesday, one of the big fallacies is that we need to take a piece of furniture and just sand the living snot out of it until it's so smooth that, you know, it's like glass. When you do that with a normal piece of furniture, you you're not helping yourself with the staining or the finishing because you've just gotten it so smooth. You've just created something that you can't, that won't take the finish properly. So I always start out with an 80 grit paper if I'm at oak or ash or some tough grain wood like that. Otherwise, I start out at 120, and I'll move up to a 180, or I might finish up with a 220, but that's about as far as I would go. And I would only use your 120, 180, and then 220 if I was working with a mahogany or a veneer or a walnut. You start getting into trying to get up into the 320s and the 400s, and I've heard people say, I stand it at the 1500. I don't know why you would do that, because you're just creating that surface for yourself that's not going to retain anything. Now, if you're turning something, that's a whole different ballgame, and I would sand something because generally you're just going to put a finish on it. I would take that as smooth as you could possibly get, because at the end of the day, you're still going to put your finish on while that's on there. Whether it's a wax or whatever you're going to do, you're putting it on while it's on the lathe. But when you sand something, you get it to the point where 220 or 180 is where you're going to be, then when you put your finish on, that's when you start to get into your 320s and 400s. The only reason you're doing that is just to take off some of the nubs, the dirt, and the contamination that you have in your finish. Now, this is 320 paper that Matt has, and there's no pressure that you do with this. You just basically will come in and just let the sandpaper do it for you. Take off any of the contamination that you have in your lacquer. And as soon as you do that, and you put your hand over that finish and wipe it off with a rag and blow it off, it's just nice and smooth for you. But you've also left behind a little bit of something that your next coat of finish can lock onto. So this is generally about, as tight as I would go with something. Again, that's just me. If you believe other ways, then God bless you. But I mean, I got other things to do. I hate sanding. I just hate it. It's just one of the worst parts. But it's a necessary evil. So, one thing I did see over the last couple of months, I talked to Matt. I don't know if he had looked into it. The Dura, they're called. It's a company called Duragrit, and they make a carbide sanding disc for your 5 or 6 inch Orbital Sanders. Now, one carbide disc will last you for a year. They just never wear down. And I'd never known about the company. It's a small family-owned business. And they only come in, I thought they came in more, but Matt looked up, they only come in 80 and 60 grit, I guess.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything over about 100.
Yeah.
So I found 120 or 150 or 2.
No, and I actually, over the last couple of days, went back because I wanted to be able to kind of talk a little bit more intelligently about it, but they're used for breaking down and getting that initial sanding on your wood without going through a ton of paper. So you could take that carbide disc and, for like over a year, this is just steady use, and sand down something and get it to the point where you're ready to go into your 120s and 180s and that kind of thing. And, a lot of times if we're creating a project and we've got glue that's leaked out and other things like that, where we've been joints, we want to just get that initial sanding or shaping. Those carbide discs and they come in sanding blocks as well, so they've got a whole assortment of different things you can do. So I would encourage you to Duragrit is the name of the company. It's a small family-owned company that, and they're I think they're like, for a pack of 5, it's like $6, so it's not,
I'm sorry, did you say that you used 320 between coats?
Finish.
A finish.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about just our coloring, and I'll say fillers because I don't do fillers until after I've colored and put a spot of finish on, and I'll tell you about that in just a second. The only one that I use ahead of time is the epoxy fillers. And these are a two-part epoxy. A lot of you may be familiar with weldwood. If you bought it in stores, they have it at Home Depot and Walmart and Lowe's. But it's getting up to about $6 for a small little tube. These are $7 if you buy them through the club account. And you can see that the length of the tube is quite a little bit larger than the $6 weldwood. And they come in 8 different colors. So it's a two-part epoxy. You cut off what you need and you just mix it together and put it on whatever you want to do. It's strong enough that you can actually rebuild parts of a missing tenon or a spindle, and then sand that down and shape it, and it just adheres right to the wood. So there's a ton of different colors. I use them a lot, and I would encourage you, if you're a wood turner or you're a carver, we make mistakes. This is Mickey brought this in. This is a perfect example of something that's been carved or been turned, and it's all split. And it's like, well, should I put coffee grounds in that, or what should I do, to put some kind of another type of filler in there, where you can take the epoxy filler, mix up a color that you like, and put it in there, and then when you turn and sand that, it'll take care of all of that, and it adheres just like glue. It'll adhere both of those pieces together, so you can fill all those cracks in with that, sand it down, and you're ready to go. Yes.
What brand is that filler again?
Everything is Mohawk. Mohawk. And if you just went on, their website is really easy to navigate around. If you just, anything that you want.
Not pass out those papers. Not pass out those papers with the name and.
Yeah, let me give you, if you need more, I guess, or you want to put it in your phone, I think Matt's got a few of these made up, but you can, this has the salesperson's name, her extension, the phone number, and then the account number that the Woodworkers Club uses. And again, once you hit I think it's $1,000, once we would hit $1,000 through the course of the year, by May of each year, you can save 6 or 7% on the cost of that, so it drops your cost down. So that's the only filler that I would ever use prior to putting a stain or a finish on something. Everything else you want to use after. You've at least got your stain and a flash coat of a sealer finish to hold that over. And these are, of course, the different Mohawk stains that there are. They've got a ton of different colors. You can match up with whatever you want. One of the neat things about using those is, and having the pigment in them, is being able to mix the colors to make a color. So if you've got a real old style mahogany table, for example, you're not going to do the base, but you're going to just do the top, you can mix a black and a brown mahogany or even a red mahogany and create something different. And we'll take a second just to kind of show you what we can do with that. You can make any, again, just like with your powders, you can make any sort of color combination that you want. You can have dark mixed with a light.
Do you need some little mixing cups, Jack?
No, I think I'll just use this rag and
Okay.
we'll just do a couple here. When you go to mix these stains up, if you take a couple home to try them, or down the road, if you come in and get a hold of Matt and want to try something, you're just going to see that, even on the end of the brush, at the end of your thing, you can just see that pigment that's laying in the bottom of it. would be a dark, I think this is a dark red mahogany.
Thank you.
So this would be a dark red mahogany, and it's on a fairly new piece of wood, so if you had to replace something with new wood versus old wood, you can come back and start to change the whole cosmetic of that just by adding a little bit of black to it. And the more you put on, the darker you can go. And again, if you have always use a scrap piece of wood, you can just really change the whole cosmetic of what you want to do and get a look that you want. And if you use a lighter piece of wood for a lighter stain, like a light walnut, new wood, so it's not really going to take much. And you can start to change that, the whole cosmetic of what you're doing with that wood just by adding a little bit different color to it.
Jack, do you always do that with raw wood, or a lot of times when you put a stain on, depending on what the quality wood is, it's going to change the chain. It's not going to be consistent.
Correct.
So would you shellac it first?
No, and I guess that kind of moves into using your toners. So I use a stain to get a base color down. So this chair, for example, that we looked at earlier, it's all pretty well bleached out, but this is the color that eventually the fellow wants to get to in the whole chair. Now, you get there pretty easy on this by using your paste wax and color mix, but you know, if you stripped a piece or you have new wood, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that. So in that particular instance, I want to come up with what I think is the base color for that. Well, it's kind of in a brown family. It's got a little reddish to it. So I would just pick something really in around that color that I would know would be close to that. Matt had bedded over here the other day. I called him up and he replaced this piece. You can kind of see this color. It's got a lot of different tones of the brown to it. And then I had him just put a brand new wood, put a base coat on. Make sure that's going to stay. So I would start out with knowing that that's my base. That's what I'm seeing through here and up and through this area. And he wants to try to blend that in a little bit better. So then in that particular case, he has stained that, and then he sealed it. So there's just one last coat of sealer on there. And then I would take that toner and start trying to build that to get to what I wanted to do here. You can see we're just kind of changing the makeup of what that is. You know, it's not dark enough.
So this toner is the same thing you did with less work.
Right. So let's take a look and see what. apologize, I haven't used these in a long time. Now we're slowly getting kind of to where you want to be, but still not there yet. We still got to try to pick up now. We've got the base down, which is this. We built another secondary layer, which is some of this now. There's some black and some kind of dirt in here. Okay, so let that set just for a second. You don't want to go too heavy with this. You'll see that I'm anywhere from 12.
Jack, keep those cans out where I can get to it.
Okay.
I got none of them just
See, I'm about 12 to, I start out and I'm just fogging it. And you're a little ways away, about 12 inches, and you're just fogging a little bit. You don't need to try to hit a home run in the first 15 seconds that you're doing it. You just want to build something.
What if you do too much and you start to get rusty?
Then you,
Brush it out or
as soon as, if you start to get too much, you gotta just walk away. Just give it 15, 20 minutes and
go away.
And I know it's like this fellow was here, I think it was you, he was here, and the other day, and he's like, I sanded through this part of the table, and every time I walk in there, I just see it. And you're gonna, because you know what's there. So the object is to hide it so that somebody else doesn't know. Okay? So, you gotta just leave it alone. And 15 or 20 minutes will go by, and then you can come back with some 320 paper. Okay? Just take some 320 paper and like no pressure, and just sand that. And you'll take that top layer of toner off, and then come right back to something else, or you may blend it and say, oh my gosh, that's what I was trying to do. And it's like, wow, I hope nobody saw that, kind of thing. So that's what you do. So you can see we're picking up some of the darkness, and we've used a Van Dyke brown. It tends to be kind of dark, and that's what Matt stained us with to get that base color, was that Van Dyke brown. So then we came in with a dark oak. We're going to come in with a dark oak because we're trying to pick up some of these little odds and ends here. Now, I'll pick up just a little bit of black, just because I want to pick up some of this dirt here. So I'm going to just fan it.
What happens to the tabletop while you're doing it?
That's not mine, I'm not worried about that. That's gotta get stripped out anyway.
Walk away.
Yeah, just sand it with 220 and walk away from it.
That's my wife.
All right. So you can kind of see, this is the new wood. Again, you gotta be looking at this. The new wood has got a tighter oak grain to it. Okay, so it's oak, just like the rest of it, but the grain, it's new wood, is tight. So this is not. This is much more open grain wood. Maybe there's a combination right here, a quarter sawn. Okay, so you just want to make it so that you like it, and that you feel that you brought that in. And the guy made a comment earlier before we started, like on a car. I don't know who had the Corvette thing going on, but he wanted a picture on a Corvette or something like that. I can't remember now what it was, but he wanted this fish on there. So it's like you struggle and struggle. At the end of the day, they went over and made the fish look like the car. And the guy came in and said, that's exactly it. And I did the same thing with these two. I shouldn't say this because the guy who owns these is here, but we needed. This was. Chuck had done this. The old walnut on here was a very dark walnut compared to what the original was. So in order to even see where to start, I had to get it wet, just with some clear lacquer thinner, and see what it was going to do. Well, by golly, as soon as you wet that, it was pretty darn close to what that is. So then I could just, like I say, 4 or 5 different colors of toner and get it to be the same. So I'm not quite sure now which which. So I guess that's a good thing. So that's kind of how you do it. You get to a point where I've done this, and then I take a look at the rest of the chair around, and what can I do to draw this here throughout this segment of the rest of the chair. And a lot of times for me, if I had one chair to fix, I brought it back and the customer would say, wow, that looks really good, the rest of these look like crap, can you do that? And so you get more work out of it. and so that can be a good thing. But at the end of the day, you're just trying to make it so that you're not bringing something back half done. And you could do this and get charged $50 to do that, and it took 5 minutes. So, I guess that's the business. And then as you go through, if you want to see where you are, there's still a little bit of finish on here. So, are you guys happy with that? You look pretty. You like that? Okay, so then if I wanted to. I just want to see how it's going to look, because I know I'm going to do something with the rest of this chair, just because I want to bring it back.
No, we're not doing anything with the rest of the chair.
No, I won't. No. See that? Yes. I just want to get something clear over that. That's just going to that's going to hold that color on. So you just take a little. This has got a flat, kind of a flat finish on it. Just take a little flat aerosol. Just go over that, just like that, just that easy. And that just got a color cast on there. So, yeah. Questions?
How's my table look?
Great. That's a beautiful deal. Great. Yeah, we don't have to worry about it. Any questions on anything so far? Okay. Let's put a little stripper on this table. We'll talk a little bit about these products because the state of Tennessee changed their law about 3 years ago to green up, and they took the methyl chloride out of strippers. So that was a big component. You could put stripper down, or I could, in 5 minutes, peel it right off. But the argument has been that it causes cancer for the last 60 or 70 years. So I don't know that it does or doesn't, but Clean Strip has what they call a quick strip now. You can get this at Walmart. It's $44, $45 a can, but it's a gel, and you don't want to use, if you're going to strip something, you don't want to use a liquid. And there's a lot of liquids out there, but when the law changed, I worked with Poultry Electric, and we tried to just come up with really what was a good go-to stripper that would adhere to the product. You could use it on a vertical face as well as a horizontal face, and it smells awful. The other stuff, I guess I got used to the smell of the methyl chloride stuff, but it came up on Wednesday. What do I do? I don't want to do the base, and the base of this is in really nice shape. There's really nothing wrong with it. But the top is all finishes going on it. It's all checkerboard. It's got may have some heat marks or some water marks to it. So I would take painter's tape and tape all underneath on the face of this, and then take your newspaper and take more painter's tape and put it right on the edge of that newspaper, and let that paper hang down and tape that tape to itself all the way around here. And that way you won't get anything on your base. That'll protect that. Since this is just a flat surface. Can't you have some newspaper or something? Or just
Press these paper towels.
okay. I just want to be able to put that on top of something.
You need some tape.
Like a paint scraper. You got a paint scraper? just a spat like a putty knife there, yeah, I'm sorry. You got a putty knife, right? Yeah, I should have one right over here. That's what I'm sorry. Now, it doesn't take a lot of this material, but being that this is not the non-methylene chloride, some of you, if you're up here close, you can kind of get the smell of that coming to you maybe. It's just awful, I think. We didn't use a lot of material. We're just working it around, and you can start to see it dry up a little bit. It'll start slowly drying itself up. You just got to keep it moist. It's the other kind of bad part about using this new stuff.
You said a third coat is good enough?
I'm sorry,
You
what?
said a third coat is good enough?
Yeah, you don't want to, you may have to do two. Most generally, I don't know, this is probably gonna, would probably take two. But,
Will the brush rinse out, or is that?
yeah, you just soak this in, I used to soak them in my lacquer thinner, and then just take my putty knife and just scrape off the residue, and then just, it'll go as long as the chip brush will go. If the bristles come out for a little bit, that's not gonna bother anything. But it's a process now. I mean, it takes a little bit of time, but you just want to keep that. So you're allowing that stripper to work, and if you're up here close, you can start to see where that's bubbling up. That's starting to bubble up a little bit. And you just want to keep after.
That done with one hand.
I'm sorry, what? And you can see in the center where we've been down to the wood, that's bubbling up pretty quick. So it's really starting to get active. But once it gets through the initial finish and starts getting into the wood, it'll start working pretty quickly. This is an older piece, and I can tell as I'm taking this off that it's got that old shellac and varnish mix, and you can just see how, gooey and that is. If it was more of a lacquer, and they started using lacquer, and they really started using lacquer in the 30s. They were making lacquer, so then it would be a lot thinner. If it was polyurethane, it'd be an absolute nightmare. You can tell I'm not an advocate for polyurethane either. Polyurethanes and varnishes have gotten so bad over the last several years that you put them on something, and within a year or two, they really start to chip. If you're on the corners of a table, or somebody's in a chair, if you take a look at this rocker over here, you'll see the effects of polyurethane or varnish that was used outside, how it's just chipped, and it just, it really, there's nothing you can do with a piece after it's had that. It takes forever to dry, and I don't like to take the chance on getting something into my finish, and within 10-15 minutes, when you put on lacquer, it's pretty well dried off on the top, so you're not going to have to worry about a lot of contamination. If you use a tung oil or something, obviously you're going to be out there for an overnight kind of thing, letting it dry. But that's just unfortunate the nature of the beast. If I had I usually have some little go through and do your sides, a brush kind of. But we'll use a steel wool, just
Soft bristle brush?
would be, like a stiff bristle brush or something. The one thing that's that I've noticed that with this new cotton rag, like an undershirt. I don't like paper towels to finish with because they get lint on everything. And I don't use tack cloth because it just makes everything sticky. You peel up your finish that you're trying to do. When you put your stripper down, I don't use water-based cleanup type of strippers. I use an oil-based product because that's an oil-based thing that's on there.
That's just lacquer thinner right there.
This is just lacquer thinner.
Yeah, this is different levels of lacquer thinner, but different, some lacquer thinners you said are a little better than others for
Well,
finishing.
if you're going to spray, you want to use the lacquer thinner. Read the label on the back of your lacquer, and you want to use in this case, the Lenmar lacquer thinner, but it's $120 for a 5-gallon pail. I don't know what a gallon is. I think it's pretty stout, but I would buy it now versus a 5-gallon pail of that. And I would buy my stuff in 5 gallons. That was $70. But it's just an all-purpose thinner. It's just kind of like tung oil. It's not the same all the time. They're mixing different solvents and different things with it. So if you mix it with a lacquer, like Lenmar, Duralac, or the precast stuff they call the Ultralac, then you're opening yourself up to a month or so down the road, all of a sudden having something blemish on you, or the finish start to come off from your piece because it separates, because they're not chemically conducive with each other. The reason that they have that there is because that's what makes it bond and come together. So this really would need another coat. We won't go through that this time for you, but you can just see the process. Now we would have to do another coat the exact same way, and then that would take off, the rest of that. And you can kind of see as we're taking it down where this original color is. It was never stained, so you're just seeing that. So to finish this, it's just going to be a light sanding. Make sure the top is clean really well, and then just start putting your finish on. And this table's done, so it's just that quick.
When you say another coat, you mean another coat of the quick stripper?
Stripper, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd want to put one more on here, and that'll get rid of the last of that residue.
You want to hand sand it, or, what's your view on orbital sanders?
You can use an orbital sander. On a piece like that, you could use an orbital sander, and I would start right out with like a 180 grit vapor. And I wouldn't go anything lower than that, because if you do, you're going to open yourself up. And I wouldn't use a lot of pressure. One of the things that we tend to do when we're sanding is like, oh, I got that spot. You just force on it, and then the next thing you know, it's like, oh my goodness, now I got to put this divot around the rest of the table. And so we come back through and we start doing stuff like that. The next thing you know, we got all these divots. And then I've seen people, when they want to sand something, you see some of these YouTube guys. When I was laying up with my shoulder, I have a lot of time that I never usually use. But anyway, you see these guys, and they would tire out with their orbital sander, and they move it just about like this. And they draw pencil lines all over everything. And they're trying to get rid of those pencil lines with every grit. And, you just need to have a light touch. There's no pressure. And you just let the sander do the work, and then you go through. I would take this to 220 if you used an orbital sander. Do the 180. And the reason that you're sanding it is because you want to open those pores back up. You seal those pores. This has wax in it. So you're using a lacquer thinner to get rid of the stripper and the wax. And then once you sand it, then I come back with that lacquer thinner again on a clean rag, and I wipe that all down, and then I blow it. And you want to get all that sawdust out of there, particularly with a piece of like oak or walnut, you know, that's got that open type of grain to it. You want to get that sawdust out of there before you start doing anything else to it. So that's what you do. You know, and it's really, you can see it's just really not that complicated.
Jack, do you use scrapers any?
Scrapers.
Yeah, to scrape instead of sanding.
Very little, because a lot of, when I do a lot of restoration, and the scraper can sometimes, I don't have the control over it that I would. I'll go to hand sanding before I would go to a scraper, just because I can control the pressure of my hand. I can't control what that scraper's going to do. If the piece where it's got, you know, like this has got some real nice patina to it that matches up. If I start scraping that, I could pull a lot of that. Or you've got, in this case here, this has about a 3/16 veneer on it, but you can get into something that's got those 1/64th, 1/32 veneers to them, 1/16. I mean, all of a sudden you're pulling that veneer off of there, and now you got a whole other mess going on. So, so I don't use scrapers that often, and I think they're great. You know, if there's a place for them, I just never, unfortunately, had a big use for it. So any questions about that? Is there anybody that's got a, that's a, you know, great?
I mean, I would think something that small, like just use a hand sand it. Are you saying an Orbital Sanders is better than
Nope.
just using a hand?
You can do whatever you want.
Just sanding it gently with a...
No, anything you'd want. It's your own personal preference. For me, I'm just looking at time, you know, and I hate sand.
I got power tools.
You know, it's like, you know, and I don't, you know, if you've been in my shop, when I had it there, you know, I had certain power tools, but I relied on a lot of guys at Woodworkers Club to make stuff for me. I mean, you know, Matt made a lot of stuff for me, Tom Giller, you know, Dean Lutz, Vince, Paul Jalbert did a ton of carving for me. I mean, there's pieces of that I wouldn't even have worked on if I hadn't had Paul's expertise to carve. And over the years, he's just been a great guy to have close. And so I would encourage you, especially if you're new to the club or something, to get out there and form some relationships with these guys. You know, Chuck Taylor's another one. I mean, Chuck I had a piece one time that was, I don't know, 3/8 dowel that had to have tons of work to it to make pieces that were recreated out of 3/8 dowel. And I'm racking my head. And Chuck was able to do that and make those pieces for an old antique bird cage. And I was like, you know. And so there's a host of guys with a ton of talent in the club, and I would encourage you to you know, use those guys, because I wasn't very bashful about it. You know your limitations, and you can, there's wood turners and everything going on.
When you're using your Orbital Sander, do you go with the grain all the time?
Well, there's sometimes that you can't. This particular piece here, and I think this fellow here had, you know, he's got a parquet table, and you know, there's where you going.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So there's just no pressure, and that's why, you know, hindsight is 20/20. You want to step up your grit and see what happens with that. You know, on a parquet table, I would probably start out with, you know, a 180 and then go to 220. See if that 180 was looking like it was going to be too aggressive, especially around corners and things. And I would just go to 220 and just take more time to sand and do that. You know, if you strip properly and you clean up properly, then you shouldn't have to come back and do a ton of sanding unless you've got like a watermark or a heat mark to it. And then it's just going to be, when I've got that stripper on there, instead of looking at it as, well, I could just sand that out, well, you've got that wet stripper on there. Take your steel wool when you're washing that off with the lacquer thinner, and I use a coarse steel wool. Now, of course, this is finer, but if you can use a coarse steel wool even for this when you're washing that stripper off. And I would take that steel wool, and that's the only time you can get right into that. You're going to get 90% of those cigarette burns and watermarks and things like that out. Now, the other thing that I ran into up at the university, they had a big sideboard, and they had put heat on it, and they had like a hot pan with, you know, even though I had a plate underneath it, it was just hot. and it clouded up that finish on there. You could just see where they had all the pots, you know, fondue pots or something. So obviously I can't take that and strip it. So I took a rag and just trace cloth, and you put a little bit of lacquer thinner on there, and I mean it's just damp. And then you can take and start feathering that finish away, because that burn, believe it or not, is not in the wood, it's only in the finish. So you can run that lacquer thinner across the top of that burn, and it'll just suck it right out of there. And what little bit is left, then you can take your toner and you can just hit that with a little toner and kill the rest of that, and they'll never know that it even happened. So, but you know, you don't necessarily have to go and strip something out to go do that.
Yeah, you changed it. When I get done that before, I always use alcohol, not lacquer thinner. Now maybe it's because I didn't like the smell of lacquer thinner, but
Well,
is there a difference?
There is a difference.
Okay.
You know, alcohol has its place in certain things. Alcohol I use for epoxy work, but it doesn't cut anything like the lacquer thinner does. I want that wax and that stripper to come off of there. You know, at the end of the day, I don't want to, if you still leave stuff out there like you would with alcohol, and I just found that if the more residue you got on there, the more sanding you have, so the more that you're going to open yourself up to do damage to the piece. So, and it'll, you know, strippers tell you on them all the different things you can do, just like anything else does. But you've got a lacquer, 9 times out of 10, you've got a lacquer-based piece that you're trying to do something with. And there's no alcohol in that. So it's not going to take care of what that is, kind of thing. So anything else on stripping? Any questions about that? Anybody that feels timid about it? You know, you can see how little bits you can use. So a $45, $46 thing of stripper is really going to last you a long time.
Do you recommend a stripping system that's not handmade, like, you know, those barrels, buckets?
I had to use, Richard Gully and I did some doors that were painted, and they had lead paint on them. We used a dipping tank. That fellow that had a piano business in Tullahoma had a dipping tank, and we weren't even going to do the doors. They had lead-based paint on them. But we were able to, the dipping tank was great, that we were able to just drop them in there and leave it for 15 or 20 minutes, and then just scrape that paint right off into the tank, and everything was good.
The dipping didn't affect your grain?
No. And again, it's not a water-based dipper. When you get into, that's a great segue to get into your water-based stuff. I mean, everybody out there has their own feelings about things. I'm just not a proponent of anything that's water-based. Years ago, we had a guy from Woodcraft that came down. He built a table and chairs, and it was pretty expensive, if I remember what he charged the people to build it, out of Honduran mahogany. And the thing that stuck with me the most, over and over and over again, was the guy was using water locks, water-based water-based lacquer, and spraying that on there. And he wasn't versed in it, and the first time he put it on there, he came out, and the wood grain had all raised. And so he had to take that all off of there and start all over again.
And he said he would never use it again.
Never use it again. That was me. And I mean, it was just an absolute nightmare. And that's just what happens. And you know, there may come a day, you know, I don't know whether I'll be here or not when it happens, but you know, that the tree huggers want you to use water-based stuff, and you know, I always said that'd be the day that I just stopped doing it. But I'm not a proponent of anything that's water-based. Stains will raise the grain, and then you'll try to get that away, and you can't sand it once you stain it. And if you put a finish over it, now you've got a grain that's all raised up, and you just can't get rid of it. We did have a guy here in the club years ago, a young fella, and he had was making some tables, and he sprayed them with oil-based sealer, and then came back and sprayed them, well, I don't know why, but with water-based lacquer. And then he's like, oh my gosh, you know, what a debacle this is. And so he ended up having to strip them all off and, you know, use oil with oil. You know, that's just the way it is. But I'm not a proponent of anything that has water in it. It just doesn't work. Yes.
I noticed that a lot of furniture has the finish has, some of them nowadays has the finish with the stain mixed in with it.
Yeah, all of your, a lot of the stuff does nowadays because it's all made overseas.
Right. Do you approach that any differently?
Well, you have to look at it on a couple of different levels. First, there's the actual wood piece, like it might be a dining room table or a chair.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually solid wood, and this farm-grown mahogany is what it is. It's white. I mean, it's literally as white as this piece of paper. You know, really underneath, and it's got a nice mahogany grain to it. But you know, there's no color in it, and they're taking a color and mixing it with their lacquer, and they're spraying it on there. So when you strip it off, you're right down to the bare wood, and everything comes off. The other thing you have, the stuff that's made in China, and most of this is the stuff that looks like knotty pine material. It's just contact paper. So literally, that's what it is. It's just if you took a look in Walmart at a piece of contact paper and see that white background that's underneath it, and they put a color on it, and then what they'll do is the border around the tabletop will be solid pine, and then the core is MDF. And we all know there's nothing on MDF. There's no grain, there's no nothing. So you have a piece of MDF, and then they take huge sheets of pine-looking contact paper, and they put it on the top of that. So, you know, the person gets it home and then puts a coffee cup on it, and it's just got a very thin shot of finish on it. So they put a coffee cup on there, or water, or whatever it is, and it bubbles up, and then they're like, oh my gosh, you know, you're in the Woodworkers Club, can you fix that? And it's like, oh man, I don't know, maybe I can just sand that off. So you sand it, and then now you got this white ring there, where it used to be bubbled up, so you're like, oh crap, what do I do? And then you try to color it, so you still have that ring. And, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to strip this off for you. So now you strip it, and the next thing you know, you got this big white piece of wood there, and you're like, what do I do? Right? So, and then it's just a nightmare, and then you want to walk up to people and say, you know what, I think you ought to just paint this piece. Because that's the only way you're going to save it. You know? I mean, honestly, that's what happens. So, and I've had it happen. I've had, you know, a lady bought a beautiful table, and spent a ton of money for it, and her daughter spilled some nail polish remover on it. And they called me and they're like, oh, what can you do with this? I go, well, the only thing you can do is just paint it. What do you mean? You know how much I spent on this? And they're like, you know, there's just MDF board on there. You can see it right underneath here. It's just MDF board. And if I strip that off, all I'm going to have is a piece of white wood with nothing. So you might just as well just paint it. I don't know, I left there, I don't know what happened. I'm sure that didn't end well for her. But anyway, but that's, at the end of the day, that's what it is. You know, the stuff made, I mean, whether it's Thomasville, Bassett, you know, hardened furniture, we worked on, I mean, my dad did a lot. He was a master refinisher, he traveled all over. And hardened furniture was just, and they're still in McConnellsville, New York, and they build high-end, top-quality stuff, but a lot of their stuff was coming from overseas. You know, Davison Company, you know, they've got their factory up there, the wood is coming in, and they're finishing it in Nashville. And they're putting their stain and stuff on it. So you can go into their place up there, and they're supplying the high-end stores like Sprints and some of the others with Davison Company furniture. You know, they're finishing it there, but it's all made overseas, and it's not even cherry wood, you know. It's just, you know, stained up to make that. And so, you know, that's, you know, the world we live in, I guess. So, and there's a lot of times when I just walk away from something. If I did have to paint it, and somebody really wanted to do something with it, then I use milk paint. It's the only thing that I found that comes in a ton of colors. It's a lye-based paint. That's, water. But its components are lye-based, and it adheres to the finish. And you can sand it, you can distress it, you can do a whole lot of neat things with it. And I could put it on, and then I could take some raw umber stain or toner and do some things to distress it and make it look like another piece. And I did a lot of milk paint, but that was the only paint that I would use. Latex just bubbles off. It doesn't have any lasting power to it. So, what else?
Getting back to the stripping, if you have rosettes or embossments or something like that table does on its leg, what's the best way to, you get your gel on and you let it sit, but you were using a scraper to do the nice flat surface.
Use a stiff nylon bristle brush, just like you would put on shoe polish or something. Just as stiff as you can, because you're not going to do anything with the nylon bristles. And then just work that stripper around with that, and then take your lacquer thinner and dip that brush in and use that lacquer thinner to clean that all off. And then, I hate to tell you this, but probably at the end of the day after it dries, you're going to have to, they sell them at Harbor Freight for like $2. They have like those dentist pick type of things. They have a series of 4 of them. They're like dentist picks. And you're going to have to use those, and you're going to have to pick that finish out of there. And I did that more times than you can imagine. But that's the only way to get a good, and at the same time, you're using a toothbrush. So when you're picking that out, you're taking that toothbrush with lacquer thinner on there, and you're constantly cleaning that off to get that residue out of there. And eventually it doesn't, it's not like hours, it's just, unless you got a ton of them to do, but you're going to get that cleaned down so that you can apply finish to it. You never want to apply finish to something that you've still got strip around and that you haven't at least hand sanded to open that grain up and get that, and wash it down with lacquer thinner to get some of that residue off there. Otherwise you're just defeating the purpose of peeling right off. I can't think of anything else. I think we've touched on everything. Is there any questions or anything that you guys have?
What do you do next to that table to make it look good?
I would do another coat of strip on it.
And then paint it.
When we find out who owns it, say take that. No.
He just left.
He probably thought, oh God.
See, I got a table at home. My wife wants me to, it's about 100 years old, and she wants me to fix it. And I don't want to mess it up, so what do I do after I get to this point?
You really can't, if you're careful and you don't be a slob with your stuff, and I'm not saying that you are, I'm just saying, like if you took this can of stripper and dumped half the gallon on there for that little bit, and without putting some newspaper down and stuff, then you got a problem. So just that little bit, if you got to add more, you can always add more, but just get that spread around and let it start working and see what you got. It's always easier to come back and do 2 thin coats, just like with anything else. And then, so that next coat is going to take almost all of that off of there. And then tomorrow, you can come back with the your steel wool and a rag and clean that all off. And then just a light sanding. And because this color, I can just see this color is the same as what you got there. There's no stain or anything on that. And I think the fellow told me that was from late 1800s. So it's got a lot of great natural patina. You don't want to kill that. So just...
So you wouldn't do anything, like I know that you got some light spots here. You wouldn't do anything to
I wouldn't do anything.
No,
I wouldn't do anything. There's no water damage. That's just the way the wood is gone. And once you put another coat of stripper on there and sand that down lightly, those darker spots, a lot of them are going to go away. And if you take a look at the legs, you've got a lot of dark and white on your legs. So the whole idea is to make it look the same,
And then you put lacquer on the, shellac on the top of that.
With this piece here, I would probably take and just put a thick coat of shellac, and then you can lightly sand that with the 320 just to get it smooth, and then I would just paste wax the top of that. Yeah, 2 coats of paste wax is all I would do. And you talk a lot about paste wax, but you know, nowadays, there's really only a couple of different finishes or polishes out there, and you can't control any more than I could what somebody wants to use, or if somebody has a cleaning lady, cleaning service come in and clean their house, you can't control what they're going to do and spray on that thing. They could take Pledge, Endust, I mean those things just suck. They're full of silicone, and they could just spray them on there. And Mohawk puts out a polish called Oz. I don't have any here, but it's a big red can, and it's called Oz. And it's a cream polish without any silicone in it. And it's a cleaner and polish. And locally, if you didn't want to, Lowe's is the only place that you can get it. It's called Guardsman. And again, it's the same woodsy smell, and it's a polish and a cleaner.
What was that again?
Guardsman.
Guardsman?
Guardsman. And it's in near the floor cleaning section in Lowe's. But they're the only ones that handle it unless you order it on Amazon. And it's about $5.50 for a big can. It'll last you a long time. And you know, if you start to use that on your furniture, or you recommend that to people, and you know how when you see somebody that's used Pledge or Endust, and they spray their piece and like they do on the TV ad, and then they wipe it, and you think, oh, look at that shine. And then a day or so later, it's all blotchy. And you know, it's just high spots of shine, low spots where it's not. And Guardsman doesn't do that. So once you start, what I always tell people with just a piece of furniture in their home is to take white vinegar and water, 50-50, and just wash that piece down, and that'll get rid of all that old Endust and Pledge and whatever crap has been on there that they used. And then come back with Guardsman and start applying that. You never spray the piece, you always spray the rag. You just spray your rag and then wipe it on there. And it would probably take, in a table like this size, if you did that, it would probably take you about a month, once a week, just a little bit. And you put it on just like you put car wax on, and then you buff it. And you'd be amazed at the dirt that'll come off on that rag, and that you'll leave a nice base coat of polish and stuff down. And then you can come back and just do it like once a month. Dean actually got me into Oz. I never had that, and he had that stuff, and it's just great. It's the same thing as the Guardsman. I would just order it whenever I did my Mohawk doors. So I would encourage you, if you have, especially if you have antiques at home, and you're getting that blotchiness to them already, and you've been using stuff like that, try to start using that. It's priced really comparable to what you're going to get for the other stuff in the stores. Any questions on changing the colors with wax or doing any of that stuff? Any finishing questions? Any spray questions?
Are you going to talk about lacquer top coats? Finishing with lacquer?
I did that.
I mean, what about fisheye?
Fisheye, good point. If you're going to spray and lacquers, you can go to your like O'Reilly's, someplace that deals with auto paints. That's an auto store, and you can buy the little plastic tube of Fisheye Remover. And I've used it for years. My dad used it for forever. And with a gallon of lacquer, you could and sealer, no matter what you had this lacquer base. I used it with the pre-cat stuff. I dropped 8 drops of that Fisheye Remover in there and just mix it up. And then it would take and help you with to remove, so you didn't have to do that. Now, of course, if you get into spraying and you spray real thick, or your nozzle is such that you're spraying with a real thick air cap nozzle, I use 0.58, and you can't. Most of what you buy in the stores is 0.80 to 1.05, 1.03. You're going to put a lot of material out. And if you're not used to spraying, or you just do it once in a while, you're going to dump so much on it, you're going to get that orange peel and fisheye stuff. So,
what's the origin of the fisheye?
I found that it's more wax that's in the. That's why it's important to use lacquer thinner to remove that stripper instead of alcohol or something like that, because you want to try to get as much of the wax off and create a surface for yourself that's going to be conducive. And now, the first time you stained your wood, you're going to put that sealer coat over the top of that, whether it's a thin coat of tung oil or a sealer. It's going to be very, very thin. If you put it on too thick, it's going to fisheye on it, whether you had the additive in there or not. So, again, it's just got to be done really thin. You got to take your time, and you can't rush something. You just got to take the time with it. And really, you're going to put down tung oil. It could be, 2 minutes or 3 minutes to put tung oil on that, and I got to walk away for a day. Just got to leave it alone. Just staring at it isn't going to make it do anything. That was a great question. I didn't even think about covering that, so that was great. But that's where you get that. O'Reilly's is about the only place around unless you go to an auto parts store.
Mohawk also has a fisheye in there.
Yes, yeah. Which you can do. So I would remind you that if you want to get into any of your materials that's outside of Mohawk, we have a 10% off every day on everything at Hober Paints. We have 10% off at Poultry Electric. There's not that much anymore at Builder Supply, but we had 5% at Builder Supply, but they've kind of gotten away from everything like that. So but if you take a look at the sponsors that are on the newsletter, those are the two that I used all the time. That would give you your 10% off. That just saves you the tax money. But they're very accommodating. It's just a small business, and they really try to do what they can for you.
I noticed talking about Hoover, I bought a gallon of nitrocellulose locally in Manchester, $52. Winchester is 26.
Yeah. And you're going to find that, sealer has a lot of solids to it, just like flat lacquer has a lot of solids. So it seems like the more solids, the more expensive that you get. But if you shop around, and they know you're in the Woodworkers Club, poultry I found, but to your point, is much more accommodating to somebody that's in our Woodworkers Club.
The last time I went and checked the poultry, I walked away because I looked at the expiration dates on the lacquer that they had in there. How important is that?
It's not really that. I mean, if you get within it, year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah, they were at least that. I mean, they were way over that.
I mean, if they are, and the problem with poultry is like a lot of grocery stores. They got people coming in where you're supposed to rotate ketchup, for example.
Yeah.
And the guy that's just putting it up there is just putting it up, and that happens. When they had that big sale last summer to shed some of their inventory, they had it in 3 different spots in the store, and they were just putting it in there. And you can look at the date, but if it's within a year and a half to 2 years, I guess it's maybe like if you buy Day Old Bakery. You get it home, if there's no mold on it, I guess it's all right. So I would pay the reduced. If I didn't see any green on it, I'd eat it. There you go. So I hope that was helpful for you. I would encourage you. I can't speak enough to the club making the investment in this stuff, and it was a blessing to me. It really was, because I couldn't take all this with me and put it in a pod and ship it. But it's here for you to use, to try, to have fun with, and just get with Matt and come in and try some of the stuff, and in your home. Where your shop is. Again, if you're a wood turner and you're a wood carver, I can't speak enough about these epoxy sticks. I just think that for something that comes up like this, and for years, I probably sit there and we use coffee grounds, or we've done something to try to go fix that. And there's an item right there that's a quick fix for you. You can do. The last thing I'll just mention is that about a year and a half ago, I got into doing epoxy work, building river tables, coffee tables, coasters, cutting boards. And there's just a plethora things you can do with that.
That'll be the March.
It'll be in March. I'm gonna do something in March for the club at the regular meeting, but again, I would encourage you, I searched a lot of different companies, Stone Coat countertops, if you would go online and look at their stuff, everything is done up for the DIY individual that wants to get into epoxy and experiment with it. Quantities are anything that you want, the color samples are small, you don't have to buy only what you want to buy.
What's it called again?
StoneCoatCountertop.com, and all the tutorials around there for the last 5 or 6 years. It's all free. You can just go on and do tutorials on anything you want to do. You can create countertops for your house, and the average cost is about $7 a square foot to create your own countertops. And they'll teach you how to do granite and marble and all that stuff. But I had a great deal of success making river tables and things. Made them out of red cedar. Tom Gillard, I think you guys have seen, some of you have seen the video that Tom did. We made that lava table we call it red cedar with the red metallic epoxy and the black mixed in for, it was just a small table, and I put a black satin poplar, a little inexpensive base under it, and a lady gave me $500 for it. And it was just like, I was like, well, what do you want for that? I just wanted enough to pay for material, and then she just gave me that one. I did old antiques, and a lot of you had antiques that you really don't know what to do with. And I had an old table from 1905, and the veneer was peeling right off it, and it would be something you would have thrown in the junkie. And I cut a hole in the center of it, like a lake, and I put a mold underneath it and filled that lake up with a metallic green epoxy, turquoise epoxy, and then did the whole top with a copper and all different colored bronze marble look to it, and attached the LED light underneath it, and the people that have it use it in their hallway as a night light. It just comes up and shines through. So, again, it's just something that you can get into and have a lot of fun with. And we'll talk more about that in March. But I would encourage you, if you're interested in doing something with epoxy, it's not expensive. There's zero VOCs with the Stone Coat countertops up, so there's no smell to it. And it's very forgiving. You can work with it in your house, and you can put water on it. You can cook on it. You can set, boiling hot fire. You can burn it, and you won't do anything to it. So it's just that stout. All right. Anything else?
Jack, thank you.
Thank you.